Welcome to Rise Up Voices from the Front Lines, your window into relationships, identity, safety, emotional awareness, regulation and intelligence, unleashed potential, passion and purpose.
Welcome back to Rise Up Voices from the Front Lines. This is a trauma-informed leadership series episode, and I'm your host, Krista Fee. And today, we are stepping into one of the most sobering truths of leadership. Wounds can destroy, or wounds can illuminate. And ultimately, the choice is yours. The Phoenix reminds us that what is burned can illuminate. Ashes are not just endings. They can become light for others. Every leader carries scars. But the real question is, have those scars been integrated into wisdom, or are they still raw wounds driving reactivity? Today's episode is about transforming pain into presence, turning wounds into wisdom, and scars into the fire-tested compass that guides leaders through the chaos. One of the veterans that I work with returned from deployment with both visible and invisible wounds. Well, this story is true for many of the veterans that I've worked with over the years. Names, dates, locations, and experiences change, but the results follow a pattern. For years, he led his unit from a place of unprocessed trauma. His reactivity looked like discipline, but it was actually fear. His suspicion looked like vigilance, but it was hypervigilance. And his anger looked like strength, but it was pain. The men under him felt the difference. They obeyed, but they didn't trust. They followed his orders, but they didn't feel inspired. His wounds were leading the charge, and they weren't yet wise. Years later, after therapy and intentional healing, he said, I still carry the same scars, but now they don't own me. They guide me. That's the shift from wounds that consume to wounds that illuminate. So what makes that difference? How do we shift from wounds to wisdom? Because those unintegrated wounds breed reactivity. Leaders snap, withdraw, manipulate, or demand loyalty because their own pain is in the driver's seat. Their compass isn't pointing north. It's spinning wildly. But integrated wounds, on the other hand, create wisdom. They don't disappear, but they become steady reference points. They create credibility. I've walked through the fire. They expand empathy. I can sit with suffering without being undone. They increase wisdom. I know the cost of decisions because I've felt the sting of consequences. And responsibility. I hold the weight of asking others to follow me with sobriety. Wounds integrated become illumination, not distortion. The trap of being anchored to pain. Some leaders mistake their wound for their entire identity, and they create an identity anchored in unending victimhood, allowing the past to chip away at the foundations for their very future. Every speech circles back to their trauma. Every decision is filtered through that one injury. Their leadership becomes stuck, as if the fire that burned them is the only story they know how to tell. Judith Herman, one of the foremost voices in trauma recovery, reminds us that recovery involves reconstructing the story of trauma in a way that restores continuity without freezing identity in the injury itself. The phoenix doesn't stay in the ashes, it rises. Leaders, too, must learn from wounds without being defined by them. Martin Luther King Jr. carried the wound of constant threat, harassment, and eventually the ultimate sacrifice of his life. But his leadership wasn't anchored in his suffering. It was illuminated by it. King didn't lead from vengeance or fear. He transformed his wounds into a compass pointing towards justice and nonviolence. His scars became light for a movement, not chains that bound him to bitterness. This is the fire-tested compass. scars that point us true north instead of keeping us stuck, buried in the ashes. So here's an example pulled from right here and now about a mother's scar that's turned to movement. One of my clients lost her son to an opioid overdose. For years, she was paralyzed by grief. Her wound consumed her, leaving her anger, bitter, and withdrawn. But slowly, she began channeling her pain into advocacy. She founded a nonprofit for families impacted by addiction. She testified at state hearings, stood alongside parents, and created community for those suffering silently. And she told me, I'll never stop hurting. But now that hurt has purpose. That's wounds into wisdom. Pain that once distorted became illumination, guiding others out of their own darkness. So let's explore the neuroscience of integration. How is all this healing and growth possible? This transformation isn't just poetic and metaphorical. It's based in science and it's neurological. Unprocessed trauma keeps the amygdala, the brain's alarm system, on high alert. The leader stays reactive, flooded by survival states. Integration shifts trauma memories from raw, unprocessed fragments into coherent narrative. And the prefrontal cortex re-engages, allowing reflection, regulation, and perspective. In other words, wisdom is what happens when the brain reprocesses wounds into story instead of threat. Leaders who integrate don't erase their scars, they rewire their relationship with them. Don't get me wrong, this isn't easy. Let's talk about the discipline of response instead of react. Integrated scars demand a discipline, the discipline of response. The Phoenix asks two sobering questions of every leader. Am I choosing to lead from a place of alignment with my North Star, or am I leading from a place of pain and victim identity? And am I reacting or am I responding? These are not theoretical. History is full of leaders who had to answer them with their lives. But even for everyday leaders, parents, pastors, teachers, executives, the questions matter. Your scars give you credibility, but they also give you power, and power must be carried responsibly. I once worked with a pastor who had been betrayed by church leadership early in his career, and that wound was deep. At first, he overcompensated by micromanaging every decision, terrified of being blindsided again. But over time, he began to integrate the wound. He admitted the betrayal, he grieved it, and then he chose differently. Instead of control, he built transparency. Instead of suspicion, he built accountability structures. He used the scar as a guide for healthier systems, not a justification for paranoia. That's what wisdom looks like. Scars guiding toward healing, not repeating harm. Learning from the past without being anchored. The challenge is balance. How do we honor the past without being trapped in it? Solution-focused psychology offers a clue. Instead of only asking what went wrong, leaders are invited to ask, what do I want instead, and what is possible now? This doesn't deny pain, it reframes it. The scar becomes part of the journey, not the destination. A phoenix doesn't rise to be what it was before. It rises into something new. So don't waste away beneath the shadow of martyrdom and revenge. Here's where many leaders stumble, because there's a lure to martyrdom and revenge. And some believe their scars give them permission to glorify suffering because I hurt, you should hurt too. And others weaponize their pain into cycles of harm, movements that are built on revenge rather than restoration. History shows us the cost. Movements that began with real grievances but devolved into vengeance ended up devouring both leaders and followers. But integrated scars do the opposite. They refuse to replicate harm. They choose to illuminate paths forward instead of dragging everyone back into the ashes. I carry my own compass covered in scars. I wasn't born into safety. I was the throwaway daughter of a woman trapped in human trafficking. My childhood was marked by wounds I didn't choose. Sexual abuse that fractured my sense of self before I even had words for it. Later in life, I endured the cycle of domestic violence, believing for too long that survival meant silence. For years, I tried to lead and live as if those scars didn't exist. I hid them, thinking that leadership meant projecting strength without cracks. But the truth is, it's those very scars that give me credibility. They're the fire that shapes me. I know what it feels like to be powerless. I know what it feels like to be silenced, discarded, betrayed. And I also know what it feels like to rise up, not the same, but different. Every scar in me is proof of passage, and every scar has become part of the compass I use to guide my work. When I speak to survivors, to first responders, to leaders carrying their own hidden wounds, I don't come with theories alone. I come with lived fire. I've been burned. I've been reduced to ashes, and I've risen. That's why this work is not abstract for me. It's blood, it's bone, and it's breath. But my scars don't own me anymore. They guide me. They remind me that healing is possible, that transformation is real, and that leadership rooted in trauma-informed integrity can be born out of even the deepest suffering. So let's start redefining wounded leadership for ourselves and for those who choose to follow. So what does it mean to transform wounds into wisdom? Those integrated wounds become credibility. Followers trust those who have endured the fire and emerged. It becomes empathy. Leaders sit with pain without collapsing or overreacting. Wisdom. Scars illuminate the journey without redefining identity. Responsibility. Leaders can carry the gravity of asking others to risk. And unintegrated wounds become reactivity. Fear and anger that drive decisions. Cycles of harm. Organizations that reenact the leader's chaos. Corrosion. Trust that erodes under blame, shame, and vengeance. The phoenix rises only when ashes are accepted as a beginning, not as an end. So here are some practical anchors for turning those wounds into wisdom. Some practices to help transform wounds into a fire-tested compass. Narrative reconstruction. Write or speak your story until the fragments become coherent. Accountability partners. Surround yourself with people who can call you out when you're leaning from pain instead of wisdom. Integration rituals, journaling, therapy, spiritual practice. Ways to fold scars into identity without being defined by them. Empathy in action. Use your scars to notice suffering in others and respond with presence, not projection. Future orientation. Ask yourself regularly, what is this scar teaching me about what comes next? So when you want to go deeper into self-reflection, ask yourself, which of my wounds are still driving reactivity instead of guiding wisdom? How can I narrate my scars as part of my journey without being anchored to them? And who around me needs the light of my scars? Proof that pain can illuminate instead of consume. Scars are not just reminders of pain. They are invitations to wisdom. The phoenix rises not just from fire, but because of it. Its ashes glow. They illuminate the way forward. As leaders, our wounds can harden us into fear, or they can soften us into wisdom. They can distort our compass, or they can steady it. And the big truth, the choice is ours. Will we let fire consume, or will we let it illuminate? Thank you for joining me today on Rise Up Voices from the Frontlines. This is a trauma-informed leadership series episode. And if this episode resonates with you, share it with someone who carries their own scars. Because the more leaders who turn wounds into wisdom, the more our communities can trust, heal, and rise up together. Join us in the Rise Up Trauma-Informed Leadership course and community, or bring one of our customized trainings to your organization, convention, or seminar. Rise up out of the ashes of your experiences and live and lead your life on fire.
Become a Rise Up Hero sponsor to provide mental wellness and crisis response resources for those who serve country and community. Join us in the Rise Up movement today.